Okay, so welcome everyone to the Grazing and Prescribed Burning for Fire Safety virtual workshop. My name is Davy Rao, and I'm the Livestock and Natural Resources Advisor with UC Cooperative Extension. I work in San Benito, Monterey, and Santa Cruz counties, and I'm really excited to share with you all some information about a couple of great projects related to fire safety today. Before we get started, I want to go over some logistics for this workshop. So this will be a 1-hour workshop, and the workshop will be recorded and it will be available online. So for folks who were not able to join, they can still see the workshop materials. During the first portion of the workshop, Felix Radcliffe will share some preliminary results from a study looking at the influence of livestock grazing on fire safety. And that study was funded by the California Cattle Council. And during the remaining part of the hour, we will discuss a grant we received from CAL FIRE to develop a prescribed burn association in San Benito, Monterey, and Santa Cruz counties. Some of the speakers will have PowerPoint presentations today. I've asked them to make sure that their visuals enhance their presentations, but they're not necessary to really understand the presentations, because I think there will be some people who called in today via telephone who won't be able to see the visuals. A lot of people did register the workshop, so to keep the noise down, I have muted everyone. And there will be a couple of opportunities for questions and comments during the call today. There will be about 5 minutes for questions after our first speaker, and then at the end of the call, there will be about 15 minutes for Q&A related to developing a prescribed burn association. If you've called in via Zoom, please use the chat box to ask questions or make comments. Jamie Tuatelli-Lewis will be monitoring the chat box. For those of you who called in with by telephone, I will let you know when we will open it up to phone questions. If you called in by phone, you can unmute yourself by pressing *6, and then you can press *6 again to remute yourself. So let's go ahead and get started. Our first speaker today is Felix Radcliffe. He is with LD Ford Consultants in Rangeland Conservation Science, and Felix will be discussing grazing for fire safety. So Felix, go ahead and take it away. You can start sharing your screen. There we go.
Great, hopefully everybody can hear me.
Yep.
Davey, do you see the screen that I'm trying to share?
I do, yes. I see your slide and just your slide. So you're good.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Davey, and thank you all for being here. My name is Felix Radcliffe, and I've been working with the team from UC Agriculture and Natural Resources. That includes Davy Rao, Sheila Berry, Luke McCauley, Royce Larson, Matthew Shapiro, and Rowan Peterson on a project to try to assess the benefits of cattle grazing in California for reducing rangeland fire fuels. My slides are being a little sluggish here. Hopefully it will change. Let me try this. Okay. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, we've had an increase in fire frequency and burn area extent over the last several decades in California, which has culminated in several of the worst fire seasons on record in the past few years. Since 2013, an average of more than 900,000 acres have annually burned in the state. And tragically, this has resulted in the loss of life of many, impaired air quality for millions, loss of structures, and a loss of forage for many ranchers as well. Unfortunately, models predict more frequent and more severe wildfires as the wildfire season gets extended due to climate change. Rangelands are a significant component of wildfires in California, and rangeland management, in particular livestock grazing, is often cited as a way to alter fire behavior and reduce wildfire severity. And that's because livestock consume biomass, reducing the amount of total biomass left on the ground. So while this biomass is forage for livestock, it constitutes fuels for fires. And reducing biomass through grazing can drastically alter the structure and amount of rangeland fuels left on the ground. Cattle are by far the most widespread and prevalent livestock species grazing on rangelands in California. And for that reason, many park districts, water districts, habitat conservation plans, and regional policy groups have included cattle grazing in their planning for fuels reduction. However, the actual management standards or prescriptions are pretty rare in these planning documents, and it's unclear to what extent cattle are actually reducing fuel loads across the state. So we wanted to ask the question, what is the effect of cattle grazing on rangeland fuel loads, and how might that affect fire behavior in California? Cattle reduce fuels on two timescales. The first is by reducing fine fuels within any grazing season. Cattle primarily consume herbaceous forage like grasses and forbs rather than woody browse. So within any given year, their greatest effect on rangeland fuels is the reduction of these fine fuels. This slide here, for those of you who can see it, shows a relatively ungrazed pasture on the left where residual dry matter is above 3,000 pounds per acre. And on the right, it shows a grazed area where residual dry matter was kept below 800 pounds per acre. So the second way that cattle can reduce rangeland fuels is by slowing or stopping the encroachment of shrubs or other woody species into grassland ecosystems. This is particularly important in coastal areas of the state where shrubs can encroach rapidly into grasslands. And because most of the management planning around this issue is about using livestock, in particular cattle, to reduce fine fuels annually, our research focused on that topic and not so much, or not really at all, on the topic of shrub encroachment. But it's good to keep that in mind because it's yet another way that over longer time periods, cattle can drastically affect the fuel loads on rangelands. But we'll be talking about fine fuels today. So to what extent do cattle reduce fuel loads across the state? To answer that question, we used two data sets to try to estimate the amount of forage removed by cattle in different counties in the state. We used the 2017 agricultural census from the USDA to tell us how many animals were in different counties in the state. And then we used the 2017 brand inspection data to fill in a bunch of sort of more nuanced data information about these different cattle, because that tells us about the age, the class, and the breed of cattle, and it helps us determine how long they were actually on range. So by putting these two data sets together, we were able to reconstruct approximately how many cattle were in each county in the state and what their age, class, and duration on range was. And then ultimately, we used that to make an estimate of the animal unit months of cattle in each county, which we could then basically convert to estimate the amount of actual forage consumed in each county. So we then wanted to figure out how much fuel was removed per rangeland acre. So we used the county crop reports from all 58 counties to estimate the number of grazed rangeland acres in each county. And we compared that against an estimate of the total rangeland acreage in each county that we got from the remotely sensed data used from the GAP analysis. And GAP is a remote sensing classification of vegetation communities in California, and it can help us identify where rangelands occur in the state and how extensive they are. So I'm going to give a little overview of some of the statewide results first, and then we'll go into the county details. Statewide in 2017, we saw that there was about 1.8 million head of beef cattle grazing in the state. And again, for those of you who can see the slide, there's a graph here that shows that, that breaks that down by different classes. And what you see is that beef cows are by far the most prevalent class at more than 600,000 beef cows in the state in that year. These cattle resulted in more than 6 million tons of forage, or you can think of 6 million tons of fuel being removed by cattle across the state in that year in 2017. And grazed rangeland acreage from those crop reports was actually more than 20 million acres total. So that's where that forage reduction really occurred. The total rangeland acreage from the GAP analysis was closer to about 58 million acres. And so what that means is that it left about 38 million acres of rangelands in the state that were not grazed as far as we know, based on the numbers that we have from the crop reports. Okay, so then if we look at pounds of fuel removed per I jumped ahead too many slides. Okay, if we look at pounds of fuel removed per grazed rangeland acre, right? So these are just from those acres reported in the crop reports. What we find by county, so now we're zooming into the county level, we found that on average, 650 pounds of fuel were removed per grazed land acre. And that fuel removal varied between 0 pounds per acre in some counties like Imperial County and San Francisco County, all the way up to about 2,200 pounds per acre in Tulare County. I want to make a quick note about this, which is that in some of the higher grazing pressure counties, so in some of the counties that had higher fuels reduced per acre, it's very possible that there could have been other things happening in those counties that we couldn't account for in our analysis. Like, for example, a lot of supplemental feeding, or feeding, or putting cattle out on irrigated pasture or on crop stubble. And we would not have necessarily captured that in our analysis. And so therefore, some of the higher values could be a little bit inflated. In terms of regional trends, what we found was that generally grazing pressure, or the amount of fuel removed per acre, was higher in the Central Coast, the Sierra Nevada foothills, and the northern counties of the state, and was generally lower in the desert and southern counties in California. And for those of you who can see this figure, you'll see that there's 5 blank counties, and those blanks basically represent where we didn't feel like we could get accurate enough information about the grazed acreage in those counties, so we left them blank in this analysis. So if we then look at those same results averaged over total rangeland acres, what we find is that there was an average fine fuel removal of only about 290 pounds per acre. And so that's much lower than what we see on the grazed rangeland acreage of about 650 pounds per acre. Nevertheless, we see similar trends across the state. So grazing pressure was higher in the Central Coast, in the Central Valley, and in Northern California generally, and lower in deserts in Southern California. And just a quick note about the deserts, there are several reasons why grazing pressure in the desert regions are going to be lower than other areas of the state. Largely, this is due to lower forage production in those areas, and also to some degree, it may be due to declining grazing allotments on federal lands, which are prevalent in the deserts and also in the Sierra Nevada counties and the mountain counties in the state. And grazing has declined in those areas pretty steadily since the 90s. All right. So if you overlay the wildfire map that I showed in the beginning, which is just a map of where the fires occurred, actually in this case in 2019 in the state, if you overlay that with the forage removal map, what you see is that many of the more wildfire prone areas in Northern California also have higher grazing pressure generally, and that's at a sort of county scale. This is somewhat less true for many of the grazed areas in the South Coast Range. This doesn't mean that these fires were all occurring on grazed rangelands or even on rangelands at all, but what it shows is that the existing grazing management has the potential to strategically remove rangeland fuels in many fire-prone areas of the state. The ranching communities are there in a lot of these areas that are also more fire-prone, and so there is the possibility to actually strategically implement grazing in areas that can maximize its fuel reduction value. Again, on this figure, for those of you who can see it, you'll see that the Mojave and Colorado deserts both have low grazing pressure, but also few, if any, wildfires. We also found that areas with high fuel removal are also areas that generally have more forage or fuels produced per acre. But this points out an important issue. It's actually not how much fuel that was removed that matters, it's how much that was left behind. And unfortunately, we don't actually know how low we need to graze grasslands in California to significantly alter fire behavior in meaningful ways. There's a great need for this kind of research in California. It's clearly an urgent need, and thankfully there's ongoing research on this topic right now. So in lieu of having really experimentally validated data in California, what we have is wildfire behavior models, such as the Scottenbergen 2005 model, that can give us an idea of how fire might behave under different fuel conditions. So these models show that reducing fine fuels in grassland systems, like those seen in California, can dramatically affect fire behavior. It's important to keep in mind, however, that these are generalized models developed by researchers in Montana, so they can help us form some guesses about how fire will behave in California grasslands, but these numbers still need to be experimentally validated in the state. Still, these models suggest that reducing residual biomass by 1,000 to 2,000 pounds per acre can significantly reduce flame height and rate of spread, and that flame height and rate of spread can be kept low across a range of wind conditions when fine fuels are kept below 800 pounds per acre. So this threshold is an interesting one to keep in mind, because this biomass level is predicted to keep flame heights below 4 feet high, which is an often cited threshold that allows firefighters essentially access to areas to actually fight fires. So most grazed rangelands in California have residual dry matter, or RDM standards. This is a management standard that basically dictates the minimum amount of dry biomass that should be left on grazed rangelands at the end of the growing season. In coastal areas of the state, these standards can be well above the 800 pounds per acre level that we were discussing a minute ago. And so that's just an interesting sort of management, I guess, paradox that we're going to have to figure out going forward. But RDM standards they're generally a minimum amount of forage that should be left on the ground. However, there's a growing body of evidence that too much RDM can be problematic for wildlife, for some native plant species, and certainly for fire. However, these maximum RDM standards are very rarely incorporated into grazing management plans. So RDM is a pretty good indication of the amount of fuels left at the end of the grazing season in September or October, which coincidentally or not is usually a time of high fire danger in California. So we wanted to look at some actual RDM values on grazed rangelands in California and compare them to total production, measured in those same areas, as a way of sort of ground truthing our top-down analysis that we did using that census data. So to do this, we took a look at several large RDM and production data sets to tell us how much forage is actually being left on the ground in grazed and ungrazed areas and regions in the state. I'm sorry, they're actually all grazed areas of the state, pardon me. And this figure shows production in blue, which ranges from about 2,000 pounds per acre inland to about 5,000 pounds per acre on the coast. And RDM is shown in orange for those of you who can see this, which ranges from about 1,000 pounds per acre inland to about 2,000 pounds per acre in more coastal sites. So in these data, anywhere from about 1,000 to 3,000 pounds per acre are being removed from these sites by cattle grazing. I want to point out 3 sites in particular, which are the 3 Central Coast sites that represent conditions across 43 different locations in coastal, central, and inland rainfall zones in the Central Coast. So these sites span a rainfall gradient, which is high on the coast and low inland. And what it shows is the vast variation in production and to some degree RDM that can occur over relatively small areas of the state, because almost all of these 43, not quite, but almost all of these 43 sites actually occur within one county. So based on these production numbers and other production numbers that are seen across the state, the observed reductions that we see in biomass from these RDM data and also from the census analysis would result in many of these grasslands moving from about 2,000 to 3,000 pounds of fuel per acre produced in a sort of normal year. Now we know that can vary a lot between years, but produced in a normal year to more like about 1,000 to 2,000 pounds of fuel per acre. So while perhaps this doesn't get us down to the more desirable 800 pound per acre number, this reduction would result in a significant change in fire behavior based on those Scott and Bergen models, and in many cases would keep those flame heights below 4 feet, at least at lower wind speeds.
Felix, you've got about 2 minutes.
Okay, great, thank you. So to wrap up, cattle grazing is an important tool for reducing fine fuels on grazed rangelands in California. What we found from the census analysis is that fuel reduction rates on grazed rangelands varied by county from anywhere from 0 to about 2,200 pounds per acre. These fuels were generally being reduced in more productive rangelands occurring in fire-prone areas of the state. In counties with higher grazing pressure, say those above 1,000 pounds per acre of fuels removal, we would expect a change in fire behavior at many wind speeds. For reducing fire risk, fuels would ideally be kept below that 800 pound per acre level to keep flame heights below 4 feet, even at high wind speeds. But this may not be feasible in high production years or in areas with higher RDM standards or with competing resource needs. There may be other reasons that we want to manage areas to have slightly higher RDM. And therefore, strategic implementation of livestock grazing for wildfire risk reduction needs to target areas with high fire severity and high ignition risk. We want to get the most out of the livestock grazing as a tool for reducing wildfire risk in key areas. However, to do this effectively, we really need more research to identify target levels of fuel loads or residual dry matter, residual biomass, for fuels reduction in California rangelands. Those numbers still need to be validated in the state. And I'm very hopeful that we'll have more concrete numbers moving forward. And finally, grazing management plans should take into consideration maximum RDM standards for fire safety and for other natural resource goals, so that we can try to actually have some standards that we graze these areas to reduce fire risk. And with that, I'd like to thank my research team. Also, I would like to thank the Point Reyes National Seashore, NRCS, Sierra Foothills Research Extension Center, and Royce Larson from UCANR for providing production and RDM data. I'd also like to thank Max Moritz of UC Santa Barbara Bren School and also of UCANR for help with fire behavior modeling. And finally, I would like to thank the California Cattle Council for funding this research. And with that, I'll take any questions. Thanks.
Felix, thank you very much for that great presentation. So the way we're going to try to do this is, if there's anybody who, this is the first time I'm doing a Zoom workshop like this, so I'm not sure how this is going to work, but what I'd like to give people who called in by phone an opportunity to ask one, maybe two questions to Felix. So if there's anybody who called in via phone and you have a question, go ahead and dial *6 to unmute yourself right now, and the first person we hear will go ahead and let that person ask Felix a question. And if we don't hear from anybody, then we'll go ahead to questions in the chat. So I'll give it about 3 more seconds if anybody wants to ask a question verbally. All right. Jamie, I think you're managing the chat for us. Are there any questions that came in the chat that we should go ahead and ask Felix?
Yeah, so it looks like there were some comments from Lynn Huntsinger about grazing pressure. I think there's a question from Veronica Stork about grazing versus fire. What are the statistics on soil compaction and erosion from grazing? That's a direct question right there.
Okay. Well, we didn't, as part of this study, we didn't assess the statistics on soil compaction or erosion from grazing, but that does relate to this question of RDM, because RDM, residual dry matter, is often one reason that we have minimum standards is to protect soil from erosion. And so it's really, you know, this becomes, rangeland management is a very complex issue, of course, and this becomes another thing that we need to think about when considering how much forage should we leave out there, how much biomass should we leave out there, because on the one hand, we need to balance the needs of protecting soil from things like erosion by leaving enough biomass on the soil, but you know, we need to figure out where is that level that protects the soil, but also will hopefully protect rangelands from elevated fire risk. And luckily, those RDM standards do give us a guideline that in most cases, if we could get fairly close to those RDM standards, we would in theory be doing all of the above. So that's a little bit of an indirect answer to that question, but I think that's how it relates to this question of how much should we graze these areas.
Okay. There's a few more questions that have popped up. One's from Lynn Huntsinger about, were you able to distinguish dairy and beef cattle in the data you had?
Oh, wow. Yes. Okay. So that's a really interesting question. So this is an interesting problem that we came across, which is that the census, that 2017 USDA census, it does differentiate between dairy and beef cattle when talking about cows specifically, but all other cattle classes are put into basically a category called other cattle, right? And so that was actually one of the primary reasons why we had to use that brand inspection data, is because the brand inspection data includes what kind of breed of cattle it was. Was it dairy cattle? Was it beef cattle, essentially? And so because we could differentiate that in the brand data, we could actually use the brand data as a way of splitting out that section of other cattle in the census. And that's how we approached that question. So the answer was yes, we were able to get to it, but it had to be sort of leveraging these two different data sets together to get that number.
Cool.
And I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, there's a couple of them. I'll try to pick one that's, I guess, more pertinent. We'll save the chat for future reference and on file, but I'll take the one from Lawrence Ford, who asked, many fire managers are suggesting that we should aim to return to a landscape from the 1860s. How would California rangeland landscape look like now if we grazed regularly and fully to that 800 pounds per acre?
Well, how would our landscapes look from, it just depends from which perspective you're asking, I think. And from a fire perspective, I think that we would probably be in a better shape in terms of what the fire danger was across most grazed rangelands if we were at lower levels of RDM, like say 800 pounds per acre. But I think that that question is asking a more nuanced thing as well, which is what is the effect on multiple sort of ecosystem services or other benefits that we get from these rangelands? And that has to be assessed, I think, on a more case-by-case basis. And that gets back into this question of strategically implementing grazing for fuels reduction. Because when we do that, it needs to be in a really nuanced way that can take into account multiple objectives, including, vegetation objectives, weed management, water quality, wildlife, etc. And that's going to vary depending where you are in the state, how, say, grazing to that level might affect things. So I guess the answer is it sort of depends, I think. But in terms of the fire perspective, I think we'd be better off if we were at lower RDM levels. And we sort of have to wait for the research to be completed before we know exactly how low those RDM levels need to be effective.
Thank you, Felix, so much. And thank you, everybody, for typing in your questions to the chat. I think that was a really interesting and useful presentation, and shows us that we have a lot more work to do in this area, but it's great to see what do we know today, and it's great to see that. So thank you very much, Felix.
Thank you all.
So next up is me. I'm going to give an update on a CAL FIRE grant that we recently received. And then after I'm done, we've got a few more speakers, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm just going to talk to you guys. So Jamie Tuatelli-Lewis from the Resource Conservation District of Monterey County and we received a grant from CAL FIRE that was awarded about a month ago. And we received about $380,000 to be used over about a 4-year period, not quite 4 years. The grant will go through March 15th, 2024. And the main goal of the grant is to develop a prescribed burn association in San Benito, Monterey, and Santa Cruz counties, specifically with the goal to reduce the risk of wildfire in our area. For those of you who are not familiar with prescribed burn associations, or PBAs as I will call them in this call, they are very similar to range improvement associations that ranchers have been participating in for decades. The range of improvement associations are landowner-led organizations where ranchers share their experience, their manpower, their equipment to conduct prescribed burns on each other's lands, with the goal usually of improving forage for livestock. So PBAs, prescribed burn associations, are very similar to that, but the membership and the goals are broader. So ranchers, of course, would be a critical component of a prescribed burn association, but PBAs could also have members from land management agencies or anyone who's interested in prescribed burning. And the goals of PBA burns could be range improvement. The goals could be reducing fire risk, weed control, habitat restoration, or whatever it is that the landowner is specifically trying to achieve. So the reason that we decided to apply for this grant is that we saw that a lot of ranchers and a lot of land management agencies in our area were really interested in burning their lands, but for a variety of reasons hadn't been able to. And with the renewed interest in and support for prescribed burning at the state level, more funding has become available for prescribed burning. So we went for it. And as part of the grant, we are going to be able to hire someone to work roughly half-time for the duration of the grant. And that person will help us conduct outreach and education to the general public about prescribed fire, about the PBA, about home hardening, and how to maintain defensible space around their homes. This person we hire will also help develop workshops and trainings to teach people about fire ecology, burn unit preparation, and permitting and liability related to prescribed burning. Those questions always come up. Plus, we will host workshops on any other relevant issues that sort of come up that we need more information about. The person that we hire will also coordinate prescribed burns that will be hands-on live fire trainings where anyone can come and learn how to use a drip torch or hand tools, backpack sprayers, or other ways to participate in a prescribed burn. Through the grant, we are going to host 5 of these hands-on prescribed burn trainings, and there will be 1 prescribed burn training in San Benito County on a private property. There will be 2 in Monterey County at the Santa Lucia Preserve. And there will also be 2 of these hands-on prescribed burn trainings in Santa Cruz County. One will be at Swan Pacific Ranch on the north coast of Santa Cruz, and the other one will be at a land trust of Santa Cruz County property. And we hope to have our first burn trainings in spring or summer of next year. So right around a year, maybe if we're lucky, a little bit less than a year from now. The 5 prescribed burns will be led by Phil Dye, and Phil is an experienced burn boss in our area. Last year, we conducted a small burn in Bitterwater, and Phil led that burn. So he is familiar with the area. We've worked with him, and we're really excited to work with him on these additional burns. And you will have the opportunity to hear from Phil today about exactly what a burn boss does and how to work with a burn boss for your prescribed burn. Using grant funds, we are also going to be able to purchase a bunch of prescribed burning equipment, things like drip torches and hand tools and hoses and backpack sprayers, radios, all these kinds of things. And we're also going to be able to purchase a burn trailer to store all that equipment in. In terms of prescribed burn associations, there are different models that people in different parts of the state are using. Some of these prescribed burn associations are 501c3 nonprofit organizations, so sort of more formalized groups, whereas others are more informal, sort of loose affiliations of people who are interested in burning. And it really just depends on what works best for the community that you're in. So that's something, as we begin to develop this prescribed burn association here on the Central Coast in our area, that's something we're going to need to consider. So today, I only have a few minutes to let you know about this exciting new grant that we have. This is just an introduction to the grant and the Prescribed Burn Association concept. We will be holding several smaller meetings in the near future with a core group of people to really start planning and developing the Prescribed Burn Association. So please do let me know if that's something that you're interested in getting involved in, and I will be sure to invite you to those planning meetings. We are particularly looking for a couple of ranchers who either have experience with prescribed burning or who are enthusiastic about prescribed burning to help lead the formation of this group, because in order for the group to be successful, it really needs to have strong support from the community. So if you're interested in being part of that group, please do let me know via email or phone call or in the group chat. At the end of the call today, I will open it up for questions and comments, and I'd like you to think about a few questions and provide some feedback at the end of the call today. So some of the questions I'd like you to think about over the next several minutes are, how could a PBA be of value to you? What kinds of trainings or information related to prescribed burning would be most beneficial to you? And are you interested in being part of that core team to develop the PBA? So think about those questions, and we will have time for more Q&A at the end. I don't want to take questions right now because we have 3 or 4 more short talks that we're going to have, and then at the end we can open it up for questions for all the speakers and then open it up for discussion at that point. So that's just sort of a teaser on this CAL FIRE grant that we got and this burn association that we are going to be developing. We're really excited about. We think it's going to have a really great impact on the community in terms of bringing people together and in terms of fire safety and all kinds of other benefits. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jamie Tuatelli-Lewis from the RCD of Monterey County, who's going to talk to us about how the RCD is involved in the grant. And I think, Jamie, you may also be discussing the state PBA website as well. So go ahead and take it away, Jamie.
Okay, thank you, Davey. So my name, for those who are not familiar, is Jamie Tuatelli-Lewis from the Resource Conservation District in Monterey County. Our role with the Prescribed Burn Association is been supporting UC Co-op with this effort, with some assistance in organizing the grant, support in organizing and planning these meetings and trainings. So basically a support role for Davy and what she's done. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the RCD, I'm going to share my screen real quick, and I'll talk along for those who are on the phone. So I'm going to share my screen. So the RCD is a technical advice organization that we offer technical assistance for things from crop use to ranchers, rangeland use, and we do a whole bunch of stuff. And I would advise, if you haven't seen the website, go to our website. We're involved in a lot of different projects. So there's the website right there. But I think I'm going to switch gears and talk about the Prescribed Burn Association and its larger group organization, which is the California Prescribed Burn Association. Can everyone see my screen right now? Yeah. Okay, so this is the website. It's the California Prescribed Burn Association website. It's calpba.org. I'll link it in the chat and with a follow-up email so people can go to the site later if they're on the phone. So this is the main hub for the groups of PBAs in the state, of which we're going to be part of. And this website is just got up and running within the last month or two, and has a whole variety of resources for prescribed burning, how to get a PBA going, what you need to do a burn, and all that. So right now I'm going to show you the website and kind of tour you through real quickly. We're going to list all the other PBAs in the state right here. So we have all these PBAs. We have our PBA in here, which is got a sort of a beginning name that we're not sure if we're going to call it that right now, but we're calling it Monterey PBA for right now. I'm going to click on that and show you. So just give it a sec. So this is a picture from last year's burn down in Bitterwater, and it's just got some basic information at the moment. So right now it has Davey and I listed as the main contacts, and that's about it. But I would like everyone to check it out because there's also a lot of information on how to do a burn. So I'm going to click on one of those links. So here's a step-by-step guide on how to, let's say, connect with your local Prescribed Burn Association. Shows you how much a burn could cost potentially, how to get a burn plan going, creating a checklist for that burn plan, seeing what kind of permits you need, etc. Smoke management plan, which is important. Liability, which is the question a lot of people have about this type of stuff. How to prepare for a burn. And then the fun part, lighting it off, and then what you do afterwards. And really, that's also an important question for a lot of people, including some of our research-oriented organizations. And then there's other resources on here as well, including libraries for information about research related to burning, etc. So I just wanted to show you that because I think it's a really informative site. We're going to be part of this larger group. How we fit in is going to be up to the group and what type of direction we take with it. But I'm very excited about this. I'm really excited to support what Davey has done so far. And really, that's about all I want to say about the Cal PBA and the RCD. So thank you. I'll take any questions, but I don't think there will be. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Let's wait until the end to take questions for all of the speakers, just so we can make sure we get all our speakers to go, and then we'll take all questions at the end. So thank you very much for that. And for those of you who have questions, go ahead and type them in now, and or save them, but we'll go through them at the end. So thanks again, Jamie. And next up, we've got Jonathan Pangburn, who's our unit forester for CAL FIRE here, and also our grant manager. And let's see, Jonathan, are you on? And did you have some slides you wanted to share?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. No slides for me today, but I do have a quick presentation for you all. I'm going to tag on to some of what you just heard from Jamie and just let you know about a little bit of the information that you either saw or heard about from calpba.org. It's a question of what is the process and do you need permits? Very simply, there are 2 and almost 3 ways to conduct burning in the state of California. The first option is to get a permit from CAL FIRE, a burn permit to conduct burning, and those come in different forms. One can be a backyard or a dooryard permit for small 4x4 piles. Another one can be for agricultural related debris if you're out pruning, but it's not just your vegetation near your structure. You can get a larger or a permit for a larger pile. And then there's a range improvement permit, which is kind of for very large piles or broadcast burning. Those are the options available, and in those instances the property owner or designee is able to do the burn at their own convenience, and the property owner and their designee, whoever lights the fire, own all the liability. CAL FIRE and your local fire district or department can come out with a standby engine to help make sure that it doesn't get out of control if they're available, and that just takes some simple coordination and planning with your neighbors. And I know that we come out on a pretty regular basis to pretty much just about every single burn in our unit. And by the way, my name is Jonathan Pangburn. I'm the forester for CAL FIRE in San Benito and Monterey counties. The next option is a cooperative agreement with my department, with CAL FIRE, under either the Vegetation Management Program, a VMP, or our new Vegetation Treatment Program, VTP. Those two have slightly different requirements based upon their environmental impact reports, but they're very similar in that they allow certain treatment activities, including prescribed fire. The VTP is a little bit more holistic in terms of its treatments that it allows. That, because CAL FIRE would be putting fire on the ground, CAL FIRE then owns all the liability, so that sometimes can be really promising to certain individuals based upon circumstances with their property and maybe contentious relationships with their neighbors. But it comes with the caveat that we are a bureaucracy. We have to go through an environmental analysis and documentation. There's a bureaucratic process that can take a fair amount of time. And even once we have the agreement in place, there's still a question of whether or not we're going to be available in any given year based upon unplanned fire activity. So we're not always able to conduct our prescribed burns with our partners. I don't want to scare anyone off. This is still a good option. I just want to make sure that you understand that the trade-off for liability is in timeliness or efficiency. You have to deal with a bureaucratic hurdle of the state of California, and that just sometimes is not always as fast as anyone would like it to be. And then finally, we have Senate Bill 901, which was mostly a funding and outreach and education type program, and then Senate Bill 1260, which opened up a new form of burning for property owners that's in conjunction with a certified burn boss, so that the property owner can do a joint burn with shared liability with the state of California. That helps to open up the door to increase the pace and scale of prescribed burning in California. It's extraordinarily important, especially for this topic right now with a newly proposed prescribed burn association. It's not all 100% together. The certified burn boss program to create new burn bosses beyond those like Phil, who went through the NWCG process, it is not going to be fully up and running until next calendar year. And then it's going to take some time to get more individuals trained. So it's, again, state bureaucracy. Nothing's going to happen overnight, but it is a monumental step in the right direction to increasing availability of prescribed burning in California. And CAL FIRE, again, is here to support. Even if we don't have a joint project, we can at least assist with burning in terms of your project stopping by for helping with keeping your fire under control and contained. So I just wanted to make sure that I went over those briefly so that we understand some of the options available under burning in state of California and CAL FIRE's role. There are a lot of specific questions for your piece of property. In the end, it is your property, and CAL FIRE can't tell you what to do. We can't say that you have to do a combination of grazing and burning followed by herbicide or whatever. We can give you ideas and options based upon best management practices for whatever your objectives are. If you're trying to control invasive species, if you're trying to promote natives, if you're trying to increase grazing or browse, all of that stuff, please feel free to contact not just me, but if you happen to live in a different area, contact your local CAL FIRE headquarters and ask to talk to the Vegetation Management Program coordinator so that we can help you along this process so that we can increase your burning availability and options.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was really helpful to hear kind of the update on that and those two bills. So thank you very much. And hopefully you'll have some people reaching out to you. Okay, so we will hold questions for Jonathan till the end as well. And next up, we've got Phil Dye, who is the burn boss that we're going to be working with on this grant. Phil, do you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Yes, good morning, Davey. Let me try and share here. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
All right, hold on a second.
Sometimes it just takes a minute.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, good morning, everyone. And as Davey said, my name is Phil Dye. I run a prescribed fire consulting firm, Prometheus Fire Consulting. And so I just want to spend a few minutes here telling you a little bit about working with a professional contractor or a prescribed fire burn boss. Many people that I encounter, ask me about how they can use fire to manage their landscapes, but they're unsure of how to go about exactly doing that. So having a contractor can help with the planning and implementation process. And excuse me, if you're using NRCS funding or other governmental funding, sometimes hiring a contract burn boss, someone with a burn boss qualification, is actually part of the requirement of that funding. So for example, I do some projects with landowners who have NRCS funding, and NRCS requires that the burn boss who implements burn has that burn boss qualification. That's obviously one of the big advantages of using a contractor, is you're getting somebody with professional experience and knowledge in both the planning and implementing of a prescribed fire. Many contractors, myself included, have extensive experience in both prescribed fire and have worked for fire suppression agencies, either currently or formerly. And so that gives that individual that depth of experience that's necessary in planning a project. It also is an opportunity for the the burn boss to leverage existing relationships. And that can be really important when you're looking for help in implementing your burn. As Davey mentioned, there's the Prescribed Burn Association process, which is really kind of exciting. That's rising up across the state. But other times, for people who are not involved with PBAs or prefer to just kind of do their own thing, it can be a struggle to get enough people to show up to implement your burn. So that's another advantage of hiring a contractor, is that person can use his or her existing relationships to bring more resources to implement your burn. Jonathan touched on liability, and I'm not going to go really deep into that because that's usually the number one question I get, is how liability is parsed out or shared. But I can tell you briefly that when I enter into a contract with my clients, I do ask for a shared liability arrangement, and there's various reasons for that. But just so everyone on the call understands, California is a simple liability state. Has a standard of simple liability, which means that you can only be held liable for any damages that occur on your burn if you failed to exercise reasonable care. So it doesn't quite rise to the gross negligence, but it does have the simple negligence bar, which surprises a lot of people, because they often think that, well, if something bad happens, I'm automatically going to have to pay for it. And that's not necessarily the case. Another reason for hiring a contractor, which is a tremendous advantage to the landowner, is many places, particularly if you're going to be getting a permit, say with CAL FIRE, is they're going to want to see some kind of burn plan, a document that outlines the conditions under which you're burning, the prescription, the weather, how you're going to staff it, what's your plan if the fire escapes the burn unit boundaries. And so having a contractor who's experienced in writing burn plans can help ease that permitting process greatly. And also to help in obtaining the necessary permits. Jonathan mentioned that many times of the year, you do need a permit from CAL FIRE or the fire authority having jurisdiction to be able to conduct burning. One thing that is also worth noting here is that a smoke management permit is required year-round in pretty much every place in the state. So a burn boss can also help you in getting the necessary smoke management permit. The other thing that I often do with my clients is we talk about the advantages and disadvantages of burning. Yeah, I wish it was this simple as going out and tipping a torch and bringing fire back to the landscape, but obviously most of you know it's not that easy. And so I spend a significant amount of time with my clients talking about, what is their goal, what is their objectives, developing realistic goals and objectives, ones that are smart, so specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound, helping to develop those smart goals and objectives, and then discussing why fire could help to achieve those goals, why fire may make it difficult to achieve those goals. And most contractors, myself included, are very straightforward with their clients and say, after a robust discussion, we might say, maybe fire is not the best option, or at least maybe fire is not the best option right now. Maybe there needs to be some work done on the land first, and then we can talk about fire as a tool.
Bill, you've got 1 minute.
Okay, thank you, Davey. And I'll just close by saying that it's important to understand that there's a bunch of tools in the toolbox. So grazing is a tool, chemical treatment is a tool, and fire is a tool as well. But they're not just like tools in the toolbox. They all have different purposes. And so sometimes what I get from clients is they say, well, why can't we just graze and everything will be fine? And depending on your goal and objectives, that may be true. But if you have different goals and objectives, perhaps grazing or chemical treatment is not a good tool, and fire may be the most appropriate tool. So I think it's really exciting that we're putting this tool back in the toolbox of private landowners.
Great. Thank you so much, Phil, for that. That was really enlightening. So we have about 5 minutes left for questions. Jamie, do you want to go through the chat and pick out some questions for some of the speakers?
Sure. I think a couple of them have been sort of answered maybe, but I'll start with the most recent and work backwards. I think there was a question from Allison Ernie about, is there a smoke management permit, maybe a smoke management plan required for burns of any size or only over a certain acreage? That might be geared towards Phil or Jonathan.
Yeah, this is Phil. So yes, even if you're back, well, actually, maybe Jonathan, you might be able to chime in here. I think it depends on the air district. In some air districts, even if you're doing backyard burning, like pile burning, you do need a smoke permit. I know in other air districts across the state that may not be the case, but Jonathan, what's your experience?
Yeah, you do need a smoke management permit from your local air district. In our case, for San Benito, Santa Cruz, and Monterey counties, it's the Monterey Bay Air Resources District, and you need a permit from them. They, depending upon the type of burn you're going to do, sometimes CAL FIRE's dooryard permit can count for it. But in general, just please make sure that you have that covered, because that is not a good way to start off the day with having an enforcement officer come out for lack of a permit.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Okay. There was another question from Gray Hayes. I think Jonathan answered that one about the role of CAL FIRE on a prescribed burn, like through a prescribed burn association. I think he answered that directly in the chat. And then there was a comment about trying to incorporate traditional indigenous knowledge, which is something I guess I'm interested in and I'm aware of. I think through maybe with our partnership, hopefully with the Amamutsun, that we can maybe learn something about that through those burns, and maybe in the future through other burns. But it's definitely something that we should incorporate into maybe just future ideas.
Yeah, so to follow up on that, the prescribed burn training that we're going to do on the Santa Cruz Land Trust land, that's in collaboration with the Land Trust, but it's also in collaboration with the Amamutsun Land Trust. So we have a connection there for looking at these cultural aspects of fire. So go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah. So that covers that one. And then I think there was a question back to Felix about his presentation with counties with more ungrazed rangeland acres. Did they have significantly higher wildfire risk? And I think Felix would have to answer that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. This is Felix. So the answer is that what we found was that we didn't directly assess that question, but what we found is that grazing was more grazing was occurring in counties that also had higher wildfire risk. And that may well be due to a secondary factor, like the fact that there's just more production or other vegetation types that are more flammable in those counties. But we didn't directly assess whether the grazed areas of those counties or even the counties themselves had a higher fire probability. And certainly not in any way did we assess whether grazing could be responsible for that.
Okay, great. And then I think there was a question maybe towards Davey. Will the PBA integrate or coordinate burning with grazing, or is there any talk of integrating? That was from Marie.
Yeah, definitely. So that's not something that has come up directly, but a lot of the work of the Prescribed Burn Association will presumably be on grazed rangeland. So there seems like a natural fit there to look at both grazing and prescribed fire together. So yes.
Okay, and we just had a recent comment from Beth Reynolds. I think it's a similar vein where how do you see fire and grazing working together to reduce fire hazard?
Yeah, again, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And if we're able to build on the work that we've been doing with Felix and do some more, fire modeling and looking at fire behavior related to livestock, I think we will be able to answer that question a lot better. And we are going to be trying to get some grant funding to look at that question in more detail. So that's definitely of interest. I want to say it's 10 o'clock, so our hour is up. If there's anybody, so please, you're welcome to get off the call now. If there's anybody with any last burning questions, maybe our speakers might be willing to stay on for a couple of minutes if there's a couple of last burning questions. But we are officially finished. Thank you so much, everyone, for being on the call today. And please get in touch with me if you have any questions or if you're interested in participating more in developing the Prescribed Burn Association. So any last
Thank you.
Yeah.
It looks like there's one more question from Jerod Bond. Maybe we can have time real quick. Will the PBA focus on developing monitoring standards related to prescribed fire and grazing?
That is not an area that we have discussed, but that's something we can consider. Yeah, let's have a conversation about that offline.
Okay. Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who participated. Really appreciate it, and we hope to see you in the future.
Hey, Davey, this is Chris at the Air District. I just wanted to jump in really quickly to respond to that, is an SMP needed or not? I responded in the chat, but it doesn't seem like anyone picked it up. There is a guideline, and it's the rule is if you're burning 10 acres or more, or if you anticipate or estimate that your burn is going to emit 1 ton of PM10 or greater. That's the guideline. So if anyone has any questions, or if you want to know if you're in a state responsibility area and get permitted by CAL FIRE, or if you're in a local responsibility area and get permitted by another entity or the Air District, you can give the Air District a call and we can let you know.
Thank you, Chris. I'm sorry. I guess I just want to answer it for people on the phone. I've realized that you answered her question. I'm so sorry about that.
Thanks, Chris.
No problem.
All right. Well, with that, I think that's a good place to end it. Thanks again, everybody, and we hope to be in touch soon. Have a great day.